Chapter 37. Dumbledore moves quickly. There was a scramble of sound from the head table, and out from under the cloth came a tabby cat with square eyeglass markings, with a large grey rat clutched firmly in her jaws. She hopped neatly up onto the head table to survey the room. Professor McGonagall?" asked Ronald Weasley, standing up. "That's my rat." Tail curved in a question mark. She strode unhurriedly from the room. Still carrying the large rat, Weasley hurried after her, with Granger and Potter a few steps behind. Well, events were moving faster than Draco liked, and that was the truth. "I'll go see what's happening," he said unnecessarily, patting Greg's arm. "Stay here and finish eating. It can't be very important." He was going to follow Potter, but he caught sight of a ginger cat in the entry hall and paused, considering. He glanced around, no witnesses. A flicker of concentration, and a white kitten padded over to the larger cat. They stared at each other as only cats could. After a long few moments, both decided they were far too important to fight the other, and the ginger cat padded away downstairs, the white cat following. That large black dog was back in the kitchens, Draco noticed. He concentrated, shifted human, and took a seat. A house elf put a slice of cake down next to him, and he picked it up and started eating, watching the dog warily. Peter Pettigrew, an unregistered animagus. Well, this was a coincidence, wasn't it? "They've caught him, I think," Draco said, and watched the dog's body language go from wary to angry, nearly snarling. "Don't bark at me," Draco added more sharply. "Isn't this more efficient than two cats trying to cover an entire castle? They'll give him Veritaserum, and it'll all be sorted out. I don't know what you're complaining about." The dog growled, low and dangerous. Draco defiantly had another bite of cake. "What about the hippogriff?" Draco asked softly. "Any progress?" It was amazing how disinterested a dog could look, if it tried. "Don't give me that. I can leave it like this, and you never get a chance at blood for blood," Draco whispered. "You go near Pettigrew now, and they'll have you. Buta can go. I'll bring him out to you, Butan, if you take the hippogriff now. You only have a little while to decide. They'll be calling auras once Dumbledore's had his turn to do an interrogation." The dog's tail thumped once, twice, 3 times, before it heaved itself to his feet. "Is that a yes?" The dog nodded slowly. Thinking about it, Draco could see why Black would be so focused on his revenge. Any reasonably hot-blooded wizard would be, losing a bosom friend to betrayal like that. It just went to show that blood traitors or not, the old blood bred true. It occurred to Draco that he'd just agreed to break a Death Eater out of Dumbledore's custody on behalf of an escaped prisoner of Azkaban. Well, at least he wasn't letting the side down. It was probably Harry's terrible influence, urging him on to have adventures and save the day. Chapter 38. Playing checkers with a chessmaster. It was easy enough to slip into the headmaster's office as Professor Lupin was hurrying out of it, in cat form. Draco trotted silently up the stone steps and slipped into the office unnoticed, planting himself under a convenient armchair. Professor Dumbledore and Potter and his pets were joined by the Minister of Magic and Professor Snape, glowering horribly at the cowering Pettigrew, tied to a chair and mid-interrogation. Draco listened with half an ear to Pettigrew spilling all sorts of interesting details, Professor Snape shouting, Harry shouting, even Ron shouting. He could have lived without Pettigrew's begging, so undignified, if informative. The Minister of Magic pulled Dumbledore aside for a whispered conversation. Draco tilted his head and cocked an ear to catch more of it. "Must see this puts me in a difficult position. That was fudge. In the interest of justice, Dumbledore." "Memory charms, confounded," yourself said. "Surely you see that it merits." "And more, too faint to hear." "Right," Fudge said, raising his voice once more. "We'll arrest them both and sort it out at the trial. Only thing to do. Severus, could you take the children back to their dormitory? And Minister, I trust this means that the Dementors will be removed." I suppose it does, Fudge said distractedly. Peter Pettigrew, my word. With a nod from Professor Snape, Harry and company were ushered out. Are you all right, Cornelius? Never been better, the minister said heartily. Perhaps a cup of tea. Draco found himself dozing. He woke when he realized Pettigrew was moving. Dumbledore was no longer in the room, and two strangers were dragging Pettigrew down the stairs. Draco brought himself back from almost dashing out from under his sheltering armchair with a jerk, and banged his head on the underside of the seat. The Aurors thumped down the stairs, and Draco waited for 1, 2, 3 flicks of his tail before padding after them, wishing he'd had more to eat at dinner. At the entrance, he pressed himself to the base of a gargoyle, stiff as a board, because the hallway was alight with spellite, and the Aurors yelling at each other about Pettigrew getting away. Why did the ministry hire no one competent? They split up to chase down different hallways, and Draco pushed away the instinctive urge to mew piteously. He sniffed the stones of the floor. Shoes, shoes, lemon candy. Rat Draco trotted off on the hunt, all other concerns momentarily forgotten. Draco came back to himself halfway through pouncing on a rat nearly as big as he was, and promptly panicked. The rat was panicking too, so it was quite the circus for a minute there. Draco thought quickly, dropped it, and changed shapes. Do you want to get out of this castle or not? He asked in a fierce whisper. The rat's whiskers twitched, paralyzed in terror, but Draco held out an empty hand, and it sniffed it doubtfully. It knew who he was, obviously. Good, that should help. Come on, quickly. And miracle of miracles, someone actually listened to Draco. He stuffed Pettigrew in his robe pocket, made sure it didn't show, and very slowly and gently strolled out towards Hagrid's hut in the deepening twilight, where neither a hippogriff or Black were waiting. The sun had set, and Draco peered in the window. Hagrid was in there, but no giant murder bird. Blast, blast, blast. Draco was losing track of how many plans he'd had to discard in the past few hours. This was ridiculous. This sort of thing wouldn't happen to his father or Dumbledore, and it was dark out here, which meant Dementors saw werewolves. Draco ventured a little further down the path and deposited Rat and a bit of pocket money on the ground. I suggest you get out of here. Pettigrew transformed, saying something ridiculous about kind, generous boys. You owe me, Draco said. For your life and freedom, I'll remember. You are very like your father, young Master Malfoy, Pettigrew said. Pettigrew made an obvious compliment sound suspect somehow. Really, today had been far too long and far too strange. Pettigrew disappeared into the darkness, and Draco was left wondering if victory always felt so odd. Draco could have killed him. He'd had a wand and Pettigrew had nothing, hadn't even been looking at him. Draco knew the incantation and the intention. Avada Kedavra, perfect indifference, and if there was ever anyone you could feel indifferent about, it was Ronald Weasley's pet rat and complete failure of a human being Peter Pettigrew. He'd even planned it out earlier, cursing Pettigrew when his back was turned for practice. And then Draco just hadn't done it. In the moment, it hadn't even occurred to him. Maybe Vince was right, and becoming an animagus really had done something to him. He sighed in relief as he closed the main door behind him. Mr. Malfoy, said the headmaster quietly. Draco jumped far enough he thought he'd end up on the ceiling, freezing with a pale face and hand over his mouth. I think I must ask you to accompany me to the hospital wing, Draco. You're shaking. Draco attempted to make his hand stop shaking. Thank you. It did not really work. At all. Still, he managed to walk next to the headmaster in a semblance of calm, hands firmly in his pockets. Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew are believed to both no longer be at Hogwarts, the headmaster said, as if talking about the weather. Sirius Black stole a hippogriff to make his escape in most dramatic fashion. Hagrid cannot decide whether to be overjoyed or angry. Draco grunted. The hippogriff was named Buckbeak. His appeal was going to be slated for a week and a half from now. I did not hold out much hope. Draco tried to summon up venom past the buzzing in his mind and managed. I hope the hippogriff eats him. It seems unlikely. Humans are not his primary diet, and when not provoked into violence, hippogriffs are rather gentle. They're giant murder birds, Professor, Draco informed him. The headmaster was surprised into a laugh. I believe, the headmaster said after a short pause. I understand everything that happened here today except for the hippogriff. Could blood freeze? Draco felt like his blood was freezing. They walked in deepening silence up another flight of stairs. Perhaps I should inform your father of events today. No, that is. I'm sure he'll be informed in due time. He would want to know that his heir is. I'm fine, Draco snarled. I can see that, the headmaster continued, very mildly. But for my own comfort, I would like Madame Pomfrey to check, and a night in the hospital wing will explain where you have been most adequately, don't you agree? It might be better for everyone that everything tonight is adequately explained. You can't be happy with how things have turned out tonight. I am an old man, and I very seldom get everything I want in life. None of my students were hurt, and more than one innocent life may have been spared. And the guilty? Draco asked in morbid curiosity. I would rather spare the guilty with the innocent than strike down the innocent with the guilty. Draco shot his headmaster a tired look, because all of those words made sense and the grammar was correct, and yet he'd managed to say complete nonsense. Mercy, my boy, is not weakness. They walked in silence for a little while. No one seems to understand that I don't care about the hippogriff, Draco said. It's not even human. Whether it lives or dies truly makes no difference to me, even if I think it shouldn't ever be allowed around children again. He glanced over at the headmaster, who twinkled at him as he met Draco's eyes. But you count Harry as a friend, and Harry cares about the hippogriff, the headmaster observed. Your prank went a little too far, and you didn't know how to stop it without drastic measures. Draco physically recoiled, and only a hand on his arm kept him from falling down the stairwell. Friendship is a delightful thing, the headmaster continued happily. I know you're delighted. Ya would be delighted. Not to worry, Draco. I believe everything will work out for the best. Draco was in an absolutely miserable mood when he was delivered to the hospital wing, and Madame Pomfrey's fussing only went so far to soothe it. He dozed off to daydreams of how to make Harry's life really miserable. He could definitely come up with something good and humbling. Chapter 39. Lupin Leaving. Pettigrew's Testimony. Black the Avenger. The headlines of Thedley profit-marked Harry over breakfast at the end of exams. Snape didn't look any more happy. Professor Lupin was absent from the head table, and Draco was glaring at Harry sullenly, just as he had been all week. Harry wasn't even sure what he'd done this time, but gossip quickly gathered Draco had been in the hospital wing for some reason the night Harry had been neatly cordoned off from confronting his godfather. It was Ron's idea to confront Draco, but Harry thought it seemed like a very good idea. Draco had been unusually isolated this week, but it was still odd to catch him in the hallway sans minions. Oi, Malfoy, Ron said. We want a word with you. You're welcome, that's two. As if you've done anything to be thanked for, said Ron. Come now, Harry, Draco said, looking past Ron as if he didn't exist. Surely you realize that someone other than you can save the day sometimes, and I even managed to wrap it up before final exams. The words you're looking for are, thank you, Draco. Black and Pettigrew escaped. How is that wrapping anything up? Asked Harry. Didn't you learn anything from the hippogriff's trial? Draco drawled. You want your precious godfather facing ministry justice. Buckbeak never got his appeal, said Hermione. He would have one. Now he can't, and running away from the trial looks ever so bad. He didn't run, he was stolen. And that means Harry's godfather will face charges for theft, even if he's innocent of all those murders. Hermione retorted. He's a black, Draco said, raising an eyebrow in his best and most infuriating, "You muggle-raised will never really be part of our world. Why do you even try, look?" "That doesn't mean he's immune to laws," growled Ron. "Ah, of course, Weasley. Your family can't afford basic things like lawyers, can they?" "Baiting people is the first resort of the insecure mind," claimed Hermione, grabbing Ron's sleeve before he could lunge. "Is this going to take much longer? I need to go to the owlery and deliver these," Draco said, gesturing with a pack of letters. "I have to tell everyone I know that Professor Dumbledore's been letting Orwolf teach us all year. Speaking of, did you know Professor Lupin's a werewolf?" Harry and Hermione both winced, even as Ron exclaimed. "When you figure it out?" asked Harry. "Oh, I heard Professor Snape remind Professor Lupin about his wolfsbane at breakfast. He'll be sacked by dinner, if he isn't already." Harry had heard enough. Lupin's office door was open. He had already packed most of his things. The Grindelow's empty tank stood next to his battered old suitcase, which was open and nearly full. Lupin was bending over something on his desk and looked up only when Harry knocked on the door. "I saw you coming," said Lupin, smiling. He pointed to the parchment he had been poring over. It was the Marauder's map. "I just heard," said Harry. "It's not true, is it?" "I'm afraid it is," said Lupin. He started opening his desk drawers and taking out the contents. "Why?" said Harry. "You can't be fired just for being a werewolf, can you?" Lupin crossed to the door and closed it behind Harry. "No," he sighed. "This past week was the final straw for Severus. So he accidentally let slip that I am a werewolf this morning at breakfast." "You're not leaving just because of that," said Harry. Lupin smiled wryly. "This time tomorrow, the owls will start arriving from parents. They will not want a werewolf teaching their children, Harry. You're the best defense against the dark arts teacher we've ever had," said Harry. "Don't go." Lupin shook his head and didn't speak. He carried on emptying his drawers. Then, while Harry was trying to think of a good argument to make him stay, Lupin said, "It's not only that. You've seen that they're reconsidering Sirius's sentence in the papers." Harry nodded. "They can't, or at least won't, admit they were wrong about him. They've called off the manhunt, and he's been offered clemency with time served in exchange for turning in Peter. But he still has to find Peter, and there are a number of other considerations, things Sirius can't take care of while on the move. I will be quite busy for quite some time." Lupin threw his last few books into his case, closed the desk drawers, and turned to look at Harry. He hesitated, then held out the Marauder's map too. "I am no longer your teacher, so I don't feel guilty about giving you back this as well. It's no use to me, and I dare say you, Ron, and Hermione will find uses for it." Harry took the map and grinned. "You told me Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs would have wanted to lure me out of school. You said they'd have thought it was funny. And so we would have," said Lupin, now reaching down to close his case. "I have no hesitation in saying that James would have been highly disappointed if his son had never found any of the secret passages out of the castle." There was a knock on the door. Harry hastily stuffed the Marauder's map into his pocket. It was Professor Dumbledore. He didn't look surprised to see Harry there. "Your carriage is at the gates, Remus," he said. "Thank you, headmaster." Lupin picked up his old suitcase and the empty Grindelow tank. "Well, goodbye, Harry," he said, smiling. "It has been a real pleasure teaching you. I feel sure we'll meet again sometime. Headmaster, there is no need to see me to the gates. I can manage. Harry, walk with me." Harry had the impression that Lupin wanted to leave as quickly as possible. "Goodbye, then, Remus," said Dumbledore soberly. Lupin shifted the Grindelow tank slightly so that he and Dumbledore could shake hands. "I had one last thing to talk to you about," Lupin explained, as Harry walked glumly next to him down towards the gates. "Yes, Professor. I think you can call me Remus, since I'm no longer your professor. You see, Sirius was your godfather. He would have been your guardian if things had been different. Under the circumstances, he was hoping it'd be all right if he wrote sometimes, or perhaps visited. I told him not to pressure you." "That would be great," Harry interrupted firmly. "I hate you." "This is not news to me, Harry Potter. The school year is over, which means 3 blissful months of me not being responsible for your welfare. Get out of my classroom. You got Professor Lupin fired. He's the only good defense professor we've ever had." Snape turned in a swirl of robes. He had information that could have led to the capture of Black throughout the year and failed to report it. He admitted to it. Criminal carelessness is grounds for being dismissed. Harry froze, then gritted his jaw. "That isn't why you did it. You did it because you hate him." "Yes, I do. And you may feel free to take his side, and I shall feel free to hate him, but that does not mean I did not have compelling reasons. Child." Harry glared at him, panting for breath, wishing that he had any expectation that he could curse his professor and live to tell the tale without being expelled. "I want to learn to make the wolfsbane potion," he said, trying to keep his tone even. "Please." Snape snorted. "You are at least 5 to 10 years from the expertise to make wolfsbane, if you ever will be. Then give me a potion simpler, but similar that I can learn, and let me memorize the recipe for wolfsbane for later." Snape eyed him, eyes still bright with rage, before nodding sharply. "In exchange, Mr. Potter, we will not speak of Remus Lupin again." Snape handed him a couple sheets of parchment after writing down 2 recipes neatly from memory. Sometimes Harry hated him for more than one reason. "I will see you when term begins in September, Mr. Potter." "Bye, Professor." It occurred to Harry on the train that Professor Snape had called him Harry, somewhere in the middle of them, yelling at each other at the top of their lungs. "I'll call about the World Cup," Ron yelled after Harry as Harry bid him and Hermione goodbye, then wheeled the trolley bearing his trunk and Hedwig's cage toward Uncle Vernon, who greeted him in his usual fashion. "What's that?" he snarled, staring at the envelope Harry was still clutching in his hand. "If it's another form for me to sign, you've got another. It's not," said Harry cheerfully. "It's a letter from my godfather." "Godfather," sputtered Uncle Vernon. "You haven't got a godfather." "Yes, I have," said Harry brightly. "He was my mum and dad's best friend. He's a convicted murderer, but he's broken out of wizard prison and he's on the run. He likes to keep in touch with me, though, keep up with my news. Check if I'm happy." And, grinning broadly at the look of horror on Uncle Vernon's face, Harry set off toward the station exit, Hedwig rattling along in front of him for what looked like a much better summer than the last. Chapter 40. Stargazing with Sirius. It was evening, a few weeks into the summer at Privet Drive, and Harry was almost asleep when someone knocked on his window. Harry's room was on the 2nd floor, so he fumbled for his glasses and had the window open, saying, "Hedwig, I just let you out," before he blinked the world into focus and saw Sirius Black in his window. Harry's mouth dropped open. "Coming out, Harry?" Black asked, as if this was a completely normal thing to do. "You how?" "Got my hands on a wand now, haven't I? Bit hush-hush, don't tell anyone that part. Simple levitation charm, but I'd suggest you use your firebolt." "Okay, Mr. Black." "Sirius, please. You make me sound so old." Harry refrained from pointing out that Sirius was his dad's age, and shortly they were both on the ground in the tidy back garden of Privet Drive. It was incredibly surreal. Sirius was standing on Aunt Petunia's prize begonias. "Let's sit by the hedge," Harry suggested, eyeing the crushed begonias warily. He knew that would be his fault in the morning, and for once it would actually be his fault. "This is a great hedge," Sirius commented. "It'd be very cozy." "Oh, didn't Remus tell you? I'm an animagus, too." "Not Grim." Sirius grinned whitely. "Great name, by the way. I'm keeping it." Harry hugged him firmly. He'd missed Grim and felt rather guilty about not doing more for the bedraggled stray dog. After a slight pause, Sirius hugged him back. They settled down, leaning against the hedge, looking up at the crystal-clear night sky. Remus said he'd mentioned me being your guardian. You know that would mean leaving this behind once I've gotten things sorted out, if you wanted. Of course, I want to come live with you. Do you have a house? Sirius laughed, startled. I do, actually. It's ruddy awful, what with me being in Azkaban since, well, it's filthy. Full of dark magic, too. Mad portraits, mad house elf. But it still has a roof and wards, which is something, I suppose. Sirius gave him a shy glance. It's at number 12 Grimmauld Place in London, if you ever need some place to go. There's tons of rooms for you to choose from, and Creature will take care of food and things. Sirius waved a vague hand. Never hurts to have a hideout, does it? Harry settled down more comfortably next to him, eyeing the twinkling velvety stars overhead. Tell me more about the hunt for Pettigrew. I could come with you, if it would help. No, Harry, you should go to Hogwarts. I don't know how long it will take, and they might get a little shirty about me kidnapping the boy who lived. I hear he's been sighted on the continent. That's why I stopped by before I had to leave the country. Might be better if you didn't mention me visiting, either, at least, until everything's sorted out. Who knew being innocent involved so much more paperwork than being guilty? I don't see why this didn't come out at the trial. Well, I was a little mad, wasn't I, and anyone Dumbledore said was on the bad side in those days. Sirius ruffled his hair. It's good you're not growing up in a war, Harry. Harry thought about fighting Voldemort at 11 and didn't comment. Why did Dumbledore think you were the secret keeper? We told him so, not the first time James and I outsmarted ourselves. There was nothing but grim depression in Sirius' voice. So, what's your favorite part about being free again? Harry asked gamely, reaching back for that fragile peace and burgeoning hope he'd been feeling. Sirius seemed to consider this for a long while. Sausages. Sausages. Axaban has a way of tainting good memories, even the ones you hold on to. Maybe especially the ones you hold on to. I could be a dog, and the dog had an easier time of it, but it still wasn't good. Anyway, the nice thing about a sausage is it's always just a sausage. It's hard to feel anything bad about one of those. Oh, Harry rummaged in his pocket and offered Sirius a small bag of candies. Calming chocolates. They're a little work in progress, but they don't make you manic anymore. You named something that made people manic, calming chocolates. There was a smile in Sirius's voice as he accepted the bag and tucked it away somewhere, by the sound of it. I'm not too worried about the name. Anyway, right now they're not very calming, but they're definitely chocolate, if you like chocolate. Can't remember, actually. Harry filed that under disturbing. Think about later. Sirius continued after a second. You keep chocolates in your pajamas pocket. Just in case I run into Dudley and have to bribe him. Aunt Vernon and Uncle Petunia are trying to put him on a diet against his will, which makes him very susceptible to bribery. He's being incredibly helpful so far this summer. It's all right staying with them. Of course it is, Harry says sturdily. We have to get you sorted out and Pettigrew in prison, don't we? They're fine until then. So, want to tell me about winning the Quidditch Cup? Harry really did. The lovely thing about summer was that Harry could stay up until dawn talking to his godfather about anything and everything that came to mind. Stories about pranks his father had played, stories about Professor Lupin, Ron teaching him wizard chess, and Hermione brewing polyjuice in her second year. I hear you get along very well with Professor Snape, Sirius said. Harry yawned. Well, sort of. I really like potions, and he teaches potions. He really hates Dad still. I certainly didn't think he'd stop. No one held a grudge like Al Severus. Probably best I don't insult him around you. Ron insults him all the time. He insults me all the time, calls me an idiot about potions and things. Why anyone let him be a teacher? Sirius muttered. Oh, he says Dumbledore likes hopeless cases, because he's a soft touch, basically. Sirius nodded, and Harry grabbed his arm. I don't want you waking up Uncle Vernon. He's, how to put it, tetchy before he has his morning tea. And after and during. Sorry, Sirius said more quietly. I suppose I can see someone hiring SN Snape because they felt sorry for him. What did you think of him at school? Well, we all had it out for each other, really. He had this theory that we were hiding something and breaking the school rules all the time, and he lived to get people in trouble, and he was a baby Death Eater, of course. Harry felt very chilly, all of a sudden. So I hated him because he wanted to get us all expelled, and he hated James because James was popular, and it's hard to summarize, really. I asked him this year why he hated Professor Lupin, and he didn't answer. That'd be my fault. Your fault. I was 16, trying to protect my friend, and a bit of an idiot. I played it off as a joke later, not a happy memory, which is why Azkaban let me keep it. What happened? He'd been trying to figure out what was up with Remus, what Remus was hiding. And Remus was hiding because he'd be kicked out of school, and no one was doing anything about it. I thought if Snape just went away, got himself into trouble, the problem would go away. He'd been asking for trouble anyway. Harry couldn't think of a thing to say to that, horrified into silence. Remus wouldn't speak to me for 3 months afterwards. James stopped me, but he understood. We were all a little obsessed with protecting Remus at the time, though I don't think he knew how much. Peter just liked being in on the secret, I think. You're going to catch him, aren't you? Harry asked, grateful for the subject change, and yawned again. Absolutely. Am I keeping you up? I don't mind. Well, how about I quiz you on your astronomy? Very important for night flying. Night flying. You've never gone out at night to fly. What are Ethy teaching in Hogwarts these days? I miss my motorcycle, I really do. I had a dream about a flying motorbike once, Harry said shyly. Would you look at that? You remember all the way to back then? Sirius wrapped an arm around his shoulders. We're going to get along just fine, huh, Harry? Absolutely. Sirius went first, pointing out the dog star, and then Harry took a turn pointing to the different stars you could use for navigation. And then Sirius was telling a story about how he'd vowed as a kid to give his children the most boring names imaginable. My brother was named Regulus, and I insisted on calling him Reg. He hated that. Harry fell asleep, between one sentence and another. Chapter 41, Roman 4, Harry Potter and the House of Black. Dudley, Harry said, not looking up from his trimming the hedge. His cousin paused, idly, on his way down the street on the other side of the hedge. Think you could cover for me going away for a few days? Say you just saw me and I was going out to the park, that sort of thing. Dudley grunted, neutrally. I left a 3-layer lemon cake in your room, Harry told the hedge, with strawberries on top. Not chocolate, Dudley asked thin air. I could make a chocolate one when I got back, if you covered for me. I want 4 layers of chocolate cake, with chocolate frosting. It was nice to know that some things in Harry's life would never change. If you really distract them, tell them you told me to eat in my room because I was distracting you or something. Don't tell me what to do, Dudley told Harry reflexively, and both of them went quiet as they considered how to recover from this conversational death trap. I want some more of those blue things as well, Dudley said. You liketh sour raspberries. The little blue candies had been Harry's effort to get Dudley to stop stealing his experiments by making the most tongue-destroying sour candy possible. The idea of Dudley trying one of the ones with magical effects, and the effect that would have on his fragile summer peace, had been rather motivating for Harry. Sensing rebellion in the colonies, Dudley pounced. A whole bag or no deal. Fine, heaven forbid Harry stop his cousin from torturing himself. Maybe they'd been a better idea than he thought. I'm leaving tonight. Where are you going? Harry ignored this question, and eventually he heard Dudley wandering off muttering insults under his breath. Harry'd been thinking about this plan for weeks, ever since his night's conversation with Sirius. Exchanging letters with his friends was all very well, but he'd been hoping to spend more of his summer with Ron, and there'd been no definite word about that. It left him feeling restless and returning over and over in his mind to Sirius words, "Whenever you need someplace to escape. 12 Grimold Place, London. Choose your own room." It wasn't as if he was turning up without an invitation. He had an invitation, and he was curious, and on clear nights with bright stars, Harry looked out his window and thought about star navigation and real flying where he hadn't dared on any previous summer. He thought about his flying car adventure with Ron and tucked away a bottle of water for the trip, eyeing his things and trying to figure out what would be really necessary and what wasn't. His cauldron didn't make the cut based on weight, even if he wanted it. Maybe Sirius's house would have some. A couple robes and some other clothes. A map of the country with a neat line drawn from Little Winging to London, Quidditch through the ages, his wand, at which point his bag was full, and Harry spent far too long brooding over the rest of his books and the frugality that had kept him from buying a bag with a bigger inside than its outside. It would have been just like Doctor Who, and he could have brought his cauldron and his books, but no, it wasn't recommended for students. HMPH. Honestly, it'd just mean he lost things more often. He'd borrowed one of Uncle Vernon's padlocks to lock his room from the inside. He'd locked his trunk and put everything really important, like his letters, in the hidden space under the bed. He'd explained where they were going to Hedwig. Was there anything else? He didn't think so. It was right before he climbed out the window that Harry paused, hit himself in the forehead, and hurriedly got his invisibility cloak out from under the bed and draped it haphazardly over himself, his bag, and his broom. Much better. It'd be hell on his wind resistance, but he wouldn't get in trouble for violating the statute of secrecy again. Harry took off into the clear night sky, set the North Star over his shoulder, sighted his reference points, and pushed his firebolt into headlong, exhilarating flight. Harry found London all right by broomstick, but finding Grimold Place proved trickier. In the end, he dismounted, bundled his broomstick in his invisibility cloak, and asked the nearest muggle, blearily exhausted in the early dawn light. A short sob story about getting lost on his way to his uncle's house later, where his uncle was expecting him, and Harry was the startled recipient of £10 and help hailing a cab. The cab driver was very nice too, and Harry was left with the disturbing impression that most people were not like the Dursleys, and he'd just been helped by a complete stranger who'd never heard of his scar for the first time in his life. Harry had been a remarkably invisible child, even before he'd been the proud owner of an invisibility cloak. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door of number 12. An awful-looking house elf opened the door, said, "The master is not at home," and slammed the door in his face. Harry thought about this. Harry knocked again. The house elf opened the door and began again, "The master is not." "He said I could come stay," Harry interrupted. Sirius did. The house elf slammed the door in his face again. Harry knocked on the door. The house elf opened the door. Harry was beginning to be amused. "I'm his godson, Harry Potter. It's very nice to meet you." "Creature is not happy to meet you. Creature thinks blood traitors are disgusting. Awful friends young Sirius had." "He has awful friends. He's out of prison, you know." Creature's ears perked up. "The awful child can come in," Creature informed him, and Harry ducked inside, hiding his smile. "If it tells Creature about Master Sirius." Sirius said I could pick my own room. Our room's upstairs. "It will not be Creature's fault if the awful child dies," Creature told him with gleeful malice, and disappeared. Well, Sirius had said the house elf was mad. Harry looked around the entrance hallway with interest. Everything was incredibly dirty, which didn't seem like a house elf at all, but maybe it was a sign of madness in house elves. Harry had the intensely pleasant thought that he could leave all this mess exactly where it wasn't. No one was there to yell at him. This had been an excellent idea. Since Sirius had said the whole place was full of dark magic and things, Harry decided the best course of action was to not touch anything. He had to touch the doorknobs to open the doors upstairs, but that was all, and aside from one nasty moment with an enchanted carpet, nothing tried to kill Harry at all. He peered into each room in turn, fascinated and disgusted by turns. There was so much stuff, weird objects in cabinets and junk on tables and ghastly old furniture, all covered in thick layers of dust, cobwebs and grime. He left clear footprints in the hallway dust. There were beds in quite a lot of the upstairs rooms, but it was hard to choose which to use and harder to stop exploring. Harry was so curious. Harry reached out for a doorknob shaped like a cobra, and creature popped into existence. Harry stifled a yelp. The awful child will not go into Master Regulus's room, creature said threateningly, considering what Dobby could do when he was upset. Sirius said you were to make sure there was food and things, Harry said to change the subject. While I'm here. If the Master wanted Creature to take care of the house, the Master should tell Creature so. That, Harry thought with continued amusement, was definitely sulking. He thought about the dark wizards he'd met. He has to go kill someone, Harry told Creature with his best serious expression. He's very focused on that right now, the killing. Creature's ears appeared to indicate this was a reasonably respectable thing for his master to be doing. I'm sure he'll be back to boss you around just as soon as he's done with the killing, Harry added, ad-libbing madly. He'll yell at you a lot about the state of the house and order you to weed the garden. That was definitely veiled hope in Creature's eyes. He is not fit to set foot in Mistress' house. Mistress. Mistress will decide about the awful child. The awful child will follow Creature. Harry followed Creature, distracted from who the mysterious mistress was by wondering how quickly he could talk the house elf into doing something about breakfast. Harry was hungry. Creature ushered Harry in front of a tremendous portrait of a woman who reminded Harry strongly of both Sirius and Draco Malfoy. Harry was immediately suspicious. Trespassers, thieves, a victim, Creature, yelled the portrait. I'm Harry Potter, Sirius's godson, Harry said, raising his voice though not as much as she did. Children should be seen and not heard, the portrait said, as if it hadn't been yelling at the top of its lungs a few moments ago. Portraits were weird. Yes, ma'am, Harry said, on the theory that he should play nice with one of Sirius' relatives. A mad one. Sirius had mentioned mad portraits. You're that James Potter's boy, she said, giving him the evil eye. Yes, ma'am, except he's dead. Good riddance, and Sirius. Oh, he's not in Azkaban anymore, because they realized he hadn't murdered all those people. He never had the stomach for any real magic, was the portrait's creepy comment. Why are you here, boy? Sirius said I could stay here, since he's my guardian now, Harry said, keeping his expression innocent. As if he was welcome in the home of my father. Why, when I have a chance to have a word with that boy? Harry thought very quickly about his Aunt Petunia. Would you like to dictate a letter? I could send it to him by owl so he knows all about how you feel about things, Harry said. Creature, the portrait yelled abruptly. Quill and parchment for the Potter boy. And breakfast, Harry added quickly. Lots of breakfast. Which is how Harry ended up taking down a long letter while trying not to listen to a word of it, getting a lecture on manners all the while, and then another lecture on table manners while he ate his breakfast and listened agreeably to the portrait insult his hair, his parentage, Sirius, and his glasses. This place, Harry thought firmly, was really quite homey, and Creature, whatever his issues, cooked a mean poached egg on toast. Take this letter to the ocean and drop it in, all right, Hedwig, Harry whispered to his owl in Sirius' very creepy back garden. Good luck. Then he darted back inside, because he didn't think it would be polite to set Sirius' interesting collection of deadly magical plants on fire, and one of them was reaching for him. After posting his letter, Harry was roped into standing without fidgeting and reciting his heritage for a portrait for an hour or so, and then having his Potter heritage recite for him. This came along with another lecture on manners. Harry nodded at the right moments, and actually did think his great-grandfather marrying a black was interesting. He was sort of related to Sirius and Draco. Asking about Draco Malfoy had been a mistake, as it turned out, because then the portrait wanted to know all about Draco and who his friends were at school, and Harry decided it was time to duck out with a "I have to tell creature to do chores." Harry had a feeling he was only being tolerated as a source of wizard gossip, and he wanted to dole it out as slowly as possible to avoid having to hex his godfather's house elf or his godfather's house. He wasn't quite sure if Sirius would miss his awful maternal portrait, even though Harry couldn't see where would miss her. Harry ended up getting into rather a staring contest with Creature over his choice of bedrooms, which Creature had made for him with an explanation of rules that Harry fundamentally didn't care about, though he did gather it was relatively close to Sirius's old room and the library. Creature's unsubtle urging to explore the library, Harry took as indication that the library would try to kill him, and Harry decided to skip it today. "Is there some place I can do laundry?" he asked Creature. "The sheets need to be changed." "The kitchen is where laundry is done," Creature said. "Can I see the kitchen?" Well, that was helpful. Harry, who was having a tremendously good day, decided that the only appropriate solution was to explore. Hopefully, by the time he found the kitchen, it would be lunch time. Harry found the kitchen by very late lunch time, tired, dirty, and with a nasty cut on his hand from a doorknob that had bitten him when he tried to close the door behind him. "Hello, Creature," Harry said agreeably to the house elf, who was doing something with an oven. "What's for lunch?" "Lunch is roast beef, treacle pudding, and potatoes. In the dining room where civilized wizards eat." "Right." Harry tiredly waved the sink into divulging water and washed his hand clear of blood and dirt. "Is there a faster way to get to the dining room from here?" "The Potter boy will follow Creature," Creature muttered, and Harry found himself going up a spiral staircase that he could swear hadn't been there before. Oh, well. He'd admit to being pretty turned around. He pulled a red candy out of his pocket and crunched it thoughtfully as he followed Creature, studying its effect on his hand. The bleeding definitely stopped, but why the candy had toe-taste like blood he didn't know. He'd used cherry flavor, it just didn't seem to stick. It turned out that in order to qualify to eat lunch in the black dining room, you had to look like a wizard, which mostly involved having a quick wash-up and putting a robe on over his things. It made Harry feel more like himself, anyway. Probably best to mention that he hadn't been through 3 whole years of Hogwarts just to start care about proper wizarding manners now. Ron didn't use proper wizarding manners, and he was the best wizard Harry knew. In a soul way, not in a doing magic way, obviously. Harry thought about Ron as he ate his roast beef and tried to calculate the likelihood of Creature poisoning him. "Say, Creature, is there a potions lab somewhere?" "There is. It is on the 3rd floor, above the library." Well, that was suspiciously helpful, actually. "Is it likely to try to kill me if I go in there?" "The potions lab will not try to kill you." Harry eyed him. "Will things in the potions lab try to kill me?" "The potions lab is a very safe place." Harry was really lucky Creature was a terrible liar. When Harry appeared to be unlikely to jump out of his chair and rush up to the potions lab to die conveniently, Creature disappeared with a sullen pop. Harry thought about inviting his friends over to help explore, but then Ron's parents would know Harry was out and about without adult supervision, unless the portrait counted, which it probably didn't. They were great parents, but they seemed to have a Dursley-shaped blind spot that Harry didn't really want to poke with a stick. He almost wrote a letter to Hermione writing her to come over, but a brief aside with Creature about who he was writing to led to a screaming lecture about mudbloods, and Harry considered exposing Hermione to that and decided best not. Instead, He cornered Creature into confirming the anti-muggle attention wards were still working, and jumped out his window on the second floor to fly his broomstick around the roof and above the back garden in narrow spirals, swooping just above the killer vegetation and narrowly avoiding projectile seeds. He came inside for dinner, fell into a bed with freshly laundered sheets in a still incredibly dusty room, and slept like the dead. Harry had only meant to stay a few days, perhaps the whole weekend at most. It was just that there was always something new to do, and the thought of the long flight back to the Dursleys did not fill him with joy. The weather wasn't quite right, either, a succession of cloudy nights that would make navigating his way tricky. Especially once he figured out that when he was wearing the invisibility cloak, the black portraits had a lot less opinions about him. It was just fantastic. Like the way he'd felt about Hogwarts during the first year. Everything new and different and a little dangerous. The third day at number 12, Harry talked Creature into showing him which room was Sirius, which was a little pushy but paid off in a big way, because Sirius hadn't cursed every book he owned, and he had all the Hogwarts textbooks still on a shelf. Harry spent 2 whole days lying in bed reading about Quidditch history and daydreaming about fighting his way upstairs heroically to conquer the potions lab and claim it as his own and not cleaning. On his 4th day at number 12, Harry had to threaten Creature into letting him use the kitchen, and that made life, well, interesting. Creature had quite the vocabulary. Harry boiled sugar and added peppermint extract and twisted candy with practiced motions, and had a fresh bag of candies to keep in his pocket by the end of the afternoon. There was just something reassuring about having food in his pocket and tucked into his bag. The next 2 days were a little tricky, because Creature was both on strike and trying to kill him by accident, which mostly involved levitating furniture and Harry having to cook his own meals. It was great dodging practice, though Harry wished he could have used magic, and Creature seemed hampered by an unwillingness to directly murder his master's guest. So far Harry quite liked Creature, but Creature did not seem to share the same feelings for him. On the 7th day, Harry decided to explore the potions lab, having poked around the library in previous days and not died horribly. The black stone on the counter had just looked so interesting somehow. He just picked it up to look at it, and then he decided he was rather tired and should sit down. He studied the even black stone. The way it caught the summer's light filtering in through the dust of the windows was just fantastic. It made him very sleepy. Chapter 42, Dealing with Dursleys. Mr. Potter. What was Professor Snape doing here? This wasn't his house. This was Sirius' house. That was muffled cursing, and then a series of spells Harry didn't recognize, and then more cursing. He didn't know Professor Snape knew those words. Open your hand, Potter. It's mine. Idiot boy, his professor snarled. Do as you're told. 3 years of habit made Harry open his hand. The stone was levitated out of sight, and then white-blue light splashed against Harry's chest. Do you have any of those ridiculous candies of yours, Potter? His professor asked, sounding harried. Why was he sounding like Harry was making a runny, congealing solution? I've got some of the cherry ones, except they taste like blood. Remind me what they do. Minor healing from 2nd year, Harry said muzzily. His professor ruffled through his pockets and poured a handful of candy into Harry's palm. But they taste like blood. Harry decided that dealing with Snape's angry voice was not worth the argument. He munched dutifully on his handful of candy. These taste awful, he told Snape earnestly. Hermione's parents are going to be mad at me. They're dentists, you know. I did not know. Tell me more about them. They're very nice, and they buy her lots of books. Not too many books. What are you doing? Dealing with the safeguards here so that I can prepare something to save your life. You absolute blithering moron. How long have you been sitting there? I don't know. Is it still Saturday? It is Friday, Snape said tightly. Your magic must have assisted you in not dying of thirst. Come to think of it, Harry was pretty thirsty. Am I sick? I could use some water. A few moments later, a small cauldron of water was put into his hands. They shook a little as Harry drank. I feel a little funny. That is because you are in the process of dying. When the headmaster called me, Dumbledore knew I was in trouble. Oh no, Dumbledore knew you would be in trouble because you had run away from home. Again, apparently. I was sent to fetch you before you did irreparable harm to Anthenthize. Tell me, what did you think you were doing? Sirius said I could, Harry said stubbornly. He didn't need to be yelled at. It wasn't fair. I expected nothing better of him, but I had moderately higher expectations of you, Potter. Why are you so nasty all the time? Talk, Potter. I need to know you are awake and coherent. Your magic will keep working as long as you are awake to let it work. Okay, I think it was probably Creature's fault. He knew I wanted to come into the potions lab, and he was really angry with me for using his kitchen and existing in his house. He set a boggart on me and a couple other things, but I knew how to deal with them from class. Very good, Harry. Keep talking. Snape was making interesting noises. Behind the bench Harry was leaning against. Are you making a potion? Can I watch? Stay where you are. Leech stones are very black magic, and I do not know. You say last you knew it was Sunday. That's right. I didn't mean to stay so long, but the weather wasn't right for flying. Sirius Black. If you murder him, I'm never speaking to you again. If he murder him, if. No murders, Harry said firmly, even if they would make you feel better. Sometimes, boy, I truly pity you. But most of the time you don't. I like that. If I murdered Sirius Black, I would go to Azkaban. He is safe from me. How you get into this much trouble, drink this, boy. Harry obediently drank the steaming green potion, which burned all the way down and left him coughing and wheezing and breathing, aware suddenly of just how strange and grey the world had been. Come, Snape offered Harry a hand, and Harry stood, swaying. You are not spending another night in this house. I like this house, Harry muttered, but more quietly. He was aware, suddenly, of just how strange he must have sounded. Under Snape's watchful eyes, Harry collected his things from his room, patted his bed sadly. Take my hand. We'll apparate to Diagon Alley and deal with your relatives in the morning. If we're going back to the Dursleys in the morning, why can't I? Not another word, Snape breathed. You do not know how close you came to dying in more than one way, and I will not have you doing so until I have had time to impress on you the full stupidity of your actions. Harry really wished Dumbledore had sent someone else, anyone else. And why was Dumbledore sending people to keep track of him in the summer, anyway? With a crack they apparated to Diagon Alley. They ate dinner in silence at the leaky cauldron, and then Harry fell into bed in a rented room. He'd remembered midway through dinner that he was still absolutely furious with Professor Snape for a few different reasons, which made it all very awkward. I will pick you up in the morning, Snape said stiffly, and left him there to fend for himself. Typical. Having breakfast with Professor Snape was even more awkward than dinner had been. Harry's little rented sitting room was nice and everything, but it was still. Harry watched his teacher sip tea and decided to venture. So, why were you there yesterday anyway? I didn't tell anyone where I was. I shall give you the explanation as it was given to me, Professor Snape said evenly, setting his teacup down with a click. Upon your mother's death, certain protections were put in place. Those protections are tied to her blood family, your aunt and your cousin. This week you almost broke them by abandoning your blood relatives and calling another house home. If Dumbledore did not monitor the situation, you would be dead twice over. No one ever said, Harry said numbly, the implications only beginning to come clear. His toast sat leaden in his stomach. So I can't leave, really. Blood is blood. It was explained to your aunt, and assumed she would pass it along to you at the appropriate age. The headmaster did say I was protected, but he didn't say exactly why or how. Years ago. Headmaster Dumbledore seldom says things without a good reason, no matter how arcane his reason may be. I would pay close attention to what he has said and not said. Harry thought about an odd comment about socks, and a gentle explanation that he could talk to snakes because he was connected to Voldemort. Did I ever tell you his theory about why I'm a Parselmouth? Harry asked, because it seemed like a good idea to change the subject before he started shouting. He said it was because Voldemort and I had a magical connection. Snape looked pained. At another time, remind me to explain to you about the taboo. Now, tell me you understand how close you came to dying and why you cannot simply avoid your relatives. Harry frowned at the table. Thanks for saving me and everything, but what was that thing? A leech stone. It's a simple enchantment of fascination, making you interested in the stone to the exclusion of all else, including food, sleep, and escape. It's meant to trap intruders to be dealt with at the owner's leisure, mainly. Snape was glaring at his tea, as if it had done something awful to him. You shouldn't be mad at Sirius for this, Harry tried. He just said I could come over any time. I don't think he realized I'd do it. Professor Snape seemed to have no comment on this crazy idea to not blame Sirius for things. Harry slumped in his chair. Come, I have one more unpleasant conversation to have this morning. Your aunt must be reminded that you are her responsibility. You're going to talk to my aunt. Oh, goody. Professor Snape in Muggle clothing was strange not for the usual wizard reasons, but because he actually looked normal for him. Instead of black robes, he wore a long black coat with lots of buttons and looked basically exactly the same as he always did, like he got no sun, took no care of his appearance, and hated you personally. Harry felt very conspicuous trailing after him in his sweatshirt and baggy jeans, invisible broom in one hand and bag over the other shoulder. It turned out there was an apparition point in Little Winging, but it was a walk from there to number 4. He just couldn't visualize Professor Snape and his aunt and uncle in the same room. It didn't fit in his head. They were two different worlds, and the collision was giving him a preparatory headache. I can go on my own, he essayed. What are you going to say, though? They don't really like magic. You might not want to. Harry paused and watched Professor Snape weigh what he was going to say. I understand being ashamed of one's relatives. My father. Professor Snape seemed to run into a wall then, as if even saying the word father was too much for him. Harry watched him warily. In any case, I have met Petunia before. We will simply be catching up. Harry wondered a little wildly if he could get away with stunning his professor and running. Probably not, he thought morosely. Professor Snape knocked on his aunt's door. His aunt opened the door and paused. Mrs. Dursley, Snape said evenly. May I come in? I've brought Harry Potter. We don't want your sort here. You're not welcome, she snapped, hovering in the doorway with glittering eyes. As one of Mr. Potter's professors, I have a number of concerns to discuss with you, he said, coming inside quite as if she hadn't spoken. We should sit down. Aunt Petunia's eyes focused on Harry. Well, make the tea, she snapped at him, quite as if he'd never left. Harry rolled his eyes and put his bag down, tucking his carefully invisible broomstick into the corner where no one would trip over it. He was more worried about the broomstick than his relatives in that situation. Harry busied himself making tea, trying frantically to eavesdrop on the conversation in the living room with no success. By the time he'd gotten in there, the pleasantries seemed to be over. I don't see how it's your concern how I raise my nephew, Aunt Petunia was saying hotly. I've done as best as I know how, and he doesn't want much looking after. He is 14 and still requires some modicum of adult supervision. Surely, Yao noticed, was no longer under your roof. I thought he was sulking. Is he? Professor Snape said silkily. Why are you the one coming around asking questions then? Lily told me about you. Harry turned to look at his professor, who had gone rather still. She said you gone quite wrong, his aunt continued with relish. Started stalking her and everything, joined a gang to tell her if you ever came around so she could tell you to knock it off. I was certain you'd end up in prison. My criminal record is not the topic of discussion today, Petunia, nor is Lily. Why else would you take an interest in the boy? You cannot imagine why someone would take an interest in Harry. I've always said he'd come to a bad end, just like his parents. A teapot on the mantelpiece exploded. I'll just clean that up, Harry said weakly. Reparo, Snape said, with a flick of his wand, and the teapot reassembled itself and levitated back to the mantelpiece. Aunt Petunia fainted. Harry patted her hand, and once she'd swum back to consciousness, handed her a cup of tea, which she clutched. Where's Uncle Vernon, Aunt Petunia? At work, she glared tearfully at Snape over her teacup. Said your sort weren't allowed to come here in his letter. Ah, but that depends on Harry living here and calling this place home for some reasonable portion of the year. So try to notice him wandering off, and you'll never have to see me again. Good, she said viciously. Professor Snape took a sip of tea. Jealousy, he observed, is very ugly. Me, jealous? What would you know about it then? Or were you talking about yourself, Sevy? Merlin, I'd forgotten that particular unfortunate nickname. Professor Snape, if you please, Mrs. Dursley. Was there anything else, Professor Snape? Did you want to harass my son next? She shot a nervous look upstairs, as if worried this would give Snape ideas. You knew my mum, Harry interrupted. We were friends, as children, Snape said distantly. Best friends, Petunia added. Always going on about how wonderful it would be once you could go away and leave all the rest of us behind, weren't you, Professor? Harry considered this for a few seconds, not even sure where to start. Professor Snape's face as he said, my father, his mother's stalker, joined our gang. That must be the Death Eaters, but... I cannot claim to have missed you overly much, Professor Snape said, dead dry. The tea is very nice, thank you, Harry. Harry was going to die of confusion and misery and go to the happy place in the sky with his parents. I'll put a leash on him, happy. Ecstatic, Professor Snape finished his last sip of tea and set the cup down. I will see you when term begins, Mr. Potter. Bye, Professor. Chapter 43. Harry Wants Brain Bleach. Harry knew, more than almost anything else in his life, that his Aunt Petunia was not a reliable witness. Still, there was usually some vein of truth somewhere in her malicious gossip. His mother may not have died in a car crash, but she also hadn't turned out to have been living quietly in the Caribbean as a singer, either. Harry decided to do the mature thing and pretend he hadn't heard anything. Nothing had happened, and he'd never had reason to visualize Severus Snape wanting to date his mother. Harry hummed very loudly to himself until the mental image went away, and when that didn't work, he tried banging his head into a pillow. Then he tried smothering himself with the pillow. Nothing really helped, so he slunk his way out of his room and grabbed pruning shears to massacre the hedge. His aunt very carefully pretended she couldn't see him, and Harry turned up for meals. At least Uncle Vernon hadn't noticed he was missing, so that was a bullet dodged. Snape and his motherno no number anything else. Creature dancing naked in the rain. Fighting Voldemort. Maybe Voldemort could kill him, that would be grand. He'd really love a horrible fight to the death right now. After a few days, Harry stopped twitching every time the curtains twitched and eyeing the teapots as if they'd betrayed him, but he still kept very busy for the next month. So, in a way, a vivid dream of Voldemort murdering an old man was a nice change of pace. Now, in another reality, Harry had only vague memories of this dream. In this reality, Harry had been attempting to learn occlumency for almost 2 years and had mostly failed except for gaining a habit of lucid dreaming. With that in mind, it was an easy decision to write to Sirius. Dear Sirius, thanks for your last letter. I've made peace again with Dudley by sharing a tremendous amount of birthday cake with him, Except then Uncle Vernon found out that I was helping Dudley disobey his diet, and we had to make ourselves scarce. I wouldn't call myself friends with Dudley yet, but we're working on it. He has ideas about Muggle music for you. Apparently, classic rock is okay, but you should listen to new stuff. He's finally been convinced that you're all right because I told him you used to have a motorbike, which is very impressive if you're Dudley. He wouldn't fit on a motorbike, but I didn't tell him that. I don't want to worry you, but I had a dream about Voldemort. It was a little different from my usual nightmares, so here it is. He was sitting and planning with Wormtail, something about doing something involving me, but after the Quidditch World Cup. Then a Muggle interrupted, and Voldemort killed him, and I woke up. They were in an old house, I think maybe in England, and Voldemort talked about murdering a woman named Bertha Jenkins. Hope all is well, and this helps. I sometimes get a sense about him because of my curse scar, but it being a full dream is new. If you come back to the country, maybe we could go by your house over my school breaks. It would be good practice for my defense class. Say hello to Buckbeak for me. Harry settled back and studied his letter with satisfaction. Yes, he'd managed to feel like he might be helping Sirius, suggest Sirius come back to the country and tell an adult about a problem, all in one letter. He was getting good at this dealing with adults thing. Harry had taken Dudley aside before the Weasleys arrived and tried to reassure him as best he could that it wouldn't result in any more curses. Dudley having been the recipient of a pig's till last time he encountered a wizard, which Harry didn't feel at all bad about, but did try to pretend to regret. Mr. Weasley works for the government, Harry tried, so he'd be sacked if he, did anything. He mostly does paperwork. Which was, of course, a complete lie, but it left Dudley less twitchy, which in turn made Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia a bit less tight around the eyes. Aunt Petunia, in particular, had looked like she'd swallowed extra lemons all summer, ever since Professor Snape had visited, and had actually sat Harry down to make a schedule of chores and meals, so that she and Harry could avoid being in the same room for 6 days out of 7. You have a government. Well, sort of. It's a ministry of the regular government, I think, Harry said doubtfully, since he'd never really paid attention to how it worked. They take care of keeping things secret and, quiet. Make sure no one bothers the Queen, that sort of thing. Dudley gave Harry a gimlet, doubtful stare that suggested he didn't think wizards cared about things like queens, and also he suspected Harry was growing up to be a serial killer. Harry, who was at this point half convinced that all adult wizards were barking mad, tried to look as if he definitely wasn't going to grow up to be a serial killer, or at least if he was, it was the sort of serial killer you backed away slowly from and respected in a quiet way, rather than panicking and screaming a lot. Right, said Dudley, and went to find his mother for reassurance they wouldn't all be murdered or turned into squirrels. Fred and George testing their new toffees on Dudley, Harry thought later with a sigh, would not actually help him convince Dudley wizards weren't collectively out to get him. You aren't cross with us, are you, Harry? Asked Fred. We know he's your precious test subject, added George. But we needed to try it on someone, and we hoped you'd share, finished Fred. Since Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were right there, Harry tried to pretend he hadn't been testing candies on Dudley all year. Things went well from there. At least Ron and Hermione escaped. Harry felt guiltily pleased that mostly his part of the lecture was Fred and George corrupting him when he was young and innocent. Ron, a bit later, commented, "It's eerie seeing you three at it together. Your innocent face is just the same as theirs." Harry groaned and tried to smother himself with a pillow again, was briefly reminded of why he'd previously been trying to smother himself with a pillow, and asked Ron plaintively, "Is there any way to erase your own memories?" "Well, there's memory charms," Ron said doubtfully, "but they can make you a little odd. Mum didn't give you that bad a lecture, did she?" "It's not that," Harry hesitated. "I just realized that at some point, Professor Snape and Professor McGonagall probably had, kissed people." Ron swiftly developed a 1,000-yard stare. Yeah, Ron. Professor Dumbledore probably kissed someone once. Maybe your parents will let us get drunk if you explain, Harry said faintly. Ron's parents did not let them get drunk. Harry was only faintly mollified by conversation over dinner with Bill Weasley about the best identification spells for cursed objects and safe handling practices, hypothetically speaking, of course. Chapter 44. Draco practices looking cool. Sorry about your toffees, Harry told Fred and George on the walk to the Quidditch Cup, keeping his voice down. They shrugged in unison, but appeared actually downhearted, because they didn't immediately pass it off with a joke. My thinking mints still barely work, my cherry healers taste like blood, and my calming chocolates, well, those actually work, but they're basically a less good version of regular Honeydukes chocolate. Dudley did like my sour raspberries, but I don't see why. They're designed to try to make your tongue fall off. Not literally. Harry makes a good point, said George. Life is suffering, added Fred. And suffering is art, concluded George. Which Harry did not quite follow, but they seemed to cheer up. We still want to include your candies on the order forms, Fred added. Professor Snape would hang me upside down by my heels and skin me, Harry said with a frown. He said I wasn't allowed to take his lessons and start an apothecary, and I think that includes the candies. Life is easier if you don't listen to professors, the twins informed him, and Harry could not actually disagree. But since he didn't want to agree either, he drifted back to talk to Ron and Hermione. The Quidditch World Cup was wonderful, but waking in the night to scatter into the woods was not. The colored lanterns that had lit the path to the stadium had been extinguished. Dark figures were blundering through the trees. Children were crying. Anxious shouts and panicked voices were reverberating around them in the cold night air. Harry felt himself being pushed hither and thither by people whose faces he could not see. Then he heard Ron yell with pain. What happened? Said Hermione anxiously, stopping so abruptly that Harry walked into her. Ron, where are you? Oh, this is stupid, Lumos. She illuminated her wand and directed its narrow beam across the path. Ron was lying sprawled on the ground, tripped over a tree root, he said angrily, getting to his feet again. Well, with feet that size, hard not to, said a drawling voice from behind them. Harry, Ron, and Hermione turned sharply. Draco Malfoy was standing alone nearby, leaning against a tree, looking utterly relaxed. His arms folded. He seemed to have been watching the scene at the campsite through a gap in the trees. Ron told Draco to do something that Harry knew he would never have dared say in front of Mrs. Weasley. Language, Weasley, said Draco, his pale eyes glittering. Hadn't you better be hurrying along now? You wouldn't like her spotted, would you? He nodded at Hermione, and at the same moment a blast like a bomb sounded from the campsite, and a flash of green light momentarily lit the trees around them. What's that supposed to mean? Said Hermione defiantly. Granger, they're after muggles, said Draco. Do you want to be showing off your knickers in midair? Because if you do, hang around. They're moving this way, and it would give us all a laugh. Hermione's a witch, Harry snarled. You're breaking my heart, Harry. Since when do you call him Harry? Asked Ron. Since last year sometime, Draco said, flapping a hand. There came a bang from the other side of the trees that was louder than anything they had heard. Several people nearby screamed. Malfoy chuckled softly. Scare easily, don't they? He said lazily. I suppose your daddy told you all to hide. What's he up to trying to rescue the muggles? Yeah, he is, Harry said shortly. And I bet I know where your dad is, so stop talking about Rons. Draco gave them a cool glance. You'll be fine. Run along, hero. Grown-ups are playing tonight. Careful the Ministry doesn't mistake you for one of that lot, Draco, Harry said. Easy mistake to make. Draco's eyebrows went up in his pale face, but he made a shooing gesture rather than engage. Harry really didn't have time for him tonight. Chapter 45. Back at Hogwarts. Slave labor, said Hermione, breathing hard through her nose. That's what made this dinner slave labor, and she refused to eat another bite. Sirius has a house elf, Harry commented, unwilling to tell Hermione he'd known about the Hogwarts kitchens for ages and hadn't really thought about it. He runs Sirius' house in London. He's, sort of bossy and murderous, but Harry didn't want to make it sound weird. I suppose he doesn't get paid either, Hermione said, rather dangerously. I don't know about that, Harry said. Sirius was busy being in Azkaban. I don't think he's had time to talk to Creature about his contract, and Sirius' family was pretty old-fashioned. Are you talking about Sirius Black? Asked Neville in an odd sort of voice. He's my godfather, Harry said, eyeing Neville cautiously. I went and saw his house this summer. Neville appeared to have nothing to say to this, and Harry was quickly distracted by Ron trying to convince Hermione to eat. They reached the entrance hall, which was packed with people queuing for dinner. They had just joined the end of the line when a loud voice rang out behind them. Weasley. Hey, Weasley. Harry, Ron, and Hermione turned. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle were standing there, each looking thoroughly pleased about something. What? Said Ron shortly. Your dad's in the paper, Weasley, said Malfoy, brandishing a copy of the Daily Prophet and speaking very loudly so that everyone in the packed entrance hall could hear. Listen to this. Further mistakes at the Ministry of Magic. It seems as though the Ministry of Magic's troubles are not yet at an end, writes Rita Skeeter, special correspondent. Recently under fire for its poor crowd control at the Quidditch World Cup, and still unable to account for the disappearance of one of its witches, the Ministry was plunged into fresh embarrassment yesterday by the antics of Arnold Weasley, of the misuse of Muggle artifacts office. Malfoy looked up. Imagine them not even getting his name right, Weasley. It's almost as though he's a complete nonentity, isn't it? He crowed. Everyone in the entrance hall was listening now. Malfoy straightened the paper with a flourish and read on. Arnold Weasley, who was charged with possession of a flying car 2 years ago, was yesterday involved in a tussle with several Muggle lawkeepers, policemen, over a number of highly aggressive dustbins. Mr. Weasley appears to have rushed to the aid of Mad-Eye Moody, the aged ex-Auror who retired from the Ministry when no longer able to tell the difference between a handshake and attempted murder. Unsurprisingly, Mr. Weasley found, upon arrival at Mr. Moody's heavily guarded house, that Mr. Moody had once again raised a false alarm. Mr. Weasley was forced to modify several memories before he could escape from the policemen, but refused to answer Daily Prophet questions about why he had involved the Ministry in such an undignified and potentially embarrassing scene. And there's a picture, Weasley, said Malfoy, flipping the paper over and holding it up. A picture of your parents outside their house, if you can call it a house. Your mother could do with losing a bit of weight, couldn't she? Ron was shaking with fury. Everyone was staring at him. That's it, Harry said, sounding distant even from himself. What did Ron ever do to you, huh? Leave you off, Malfoy, or I'll make you. Oh, and how would you do that, Potter? I'm not joking. I am so turned off this game. You just don't like his dad because he wants to put your dad in prison for collecting dark stuff. Scared, Malfoy. Malfoy's pale face went slightly pink. Don't you dare talk about my father, Potter. Keep your mouth shut then, said Harry, turning away. Bang. Several people screamed. Harry felt something white-hot graze the side of his face. He plunged his hand into his robes for his wand, but before he'd even touched it, he heard a second loud bang and a roar that echoed through the entrance hall. Oh no, you don't, laddie. Harry spun around. Professor Moody was limping down the marble staircase. His wand was out, and it was pointing right at a pure white ferret, which was shivering on the stone-flagged floor exactly where Malfoy had been standing. There was a terrified silence in the entrance hall. Nobody but Moody was moving a muscle. Moody turned to look at Harry at least. His normal eye was looking at Harry. The other one was pointing into the back of his head. Did he get you? Moody growled. His voice was low and gravelly. No, said Harry, missed. Leave it, Moody shouted. Leave what? Harry said, bewildered. Not you him. Moody growled, jerking his thumb over his shoulder at Crab, who had just frozen, about to pick up the white ferret. It seemed that Moody's rolling eye was magical and could see out of the back of his head. Moody started to limp toward Crab, Goyle, and the ferret, which gave a terrified squeak and took off, streaking toward the dungeons. "I don't think so," roared Moody, pointing his wand at the ferret again. It flew 10 feet into the air, fell with a smack to the floor, and then bounced upward once more. "I don't like people who attack when their opponent's back's turned," growled Moody as the ferret bounced higher and higher, squealing in pain. "Stinking, cowardly, scummy thing to do." The ferret flew through the air, its legs and tail flailing helplessly. "Never do that again," said Moody, speaking each word as the ferret hit the stone floor and bounced upward again. "Professor Moody," said a shocked voice. Professor McGonagall was coming down the marble staircase with her arms full of books. "Hello, Professor McGonagall," said Moody calmly, bouncing the ferret still higher. What are you doing?" said Professor McGonagall, her eyes following the bouncing ferret's progress through the air. "Teaching," said Moody. "Teach Moody, is that a student?" shrieked Professor McGonagall, the book spilling out of her arms. "Yep," said Moody. "No," cried Professor McGonagall, running down the stairs and pulling out her wand. Then, with an odd look on her face, she paused. "Mr. Malfoy?" she asked, gaze still on the ferret. "That's the one," Moody agreed. "Mr. Malfoy," Professor McGonagall said, "this is a good opportunity to practice. Concentrate, if you please. Secondary would be easier than primary, I think." The ferret form flickered as if it was in a bad old movie, and then it was a small white cat, fur on end, and then it was Draco, panting, lying in a heap on the floor. "Moody, we never use transfiguration as a punishment," said Professor McGonagall wildly. "Surely Professor Dumbledore told you that." "He might have mentioned it, yeah," said Moody, scratching his chin unconcernedly. "But I thought a good sharp shock. We give detentions, Moody." "Or speak to the offender's head of house." "I'll do that then," said Moody, staring at Malfoy. "You're a bit of a surprise, aren't you?" Moody told Malfoy. It did not sound like a compliment. The rest of the students were whispering. Harry heard Ron asking Hermione if she knew Draco was an animagus. Malfoy pushed himself to his feet. "Now your head of house will be Snape, will it?" "Yes," said Malfoy resentfully. "Another old friend," growled Moody. "I've been looking forward to a chat with old Snape. Come on, you." And he seized Malfoy's upper arm and marched him off toward the dungeons. Professor McGonagall stared anxiously after them for a few moments, then waved her wand at her fallen books, causing them to soar up into the air and back into her arms. Chapter 46, Interlude, Draco's Education. Draco tried, and failed to ignore the nerves thrumming through him as Moody hauled him along towards Snape's office. "So, if you're such a hotshot wizard, why'd you hex him in the back, then?" asked Moody abruptly. "I don't know what you mean." "Your father always was a cowardly snake. You a coward, boy." "I don't see how it would have been better to hex him when he was looking at me, Professor." Draco eyed Moody very warily. "You heard stories about him, especially if you had a father like Draco's father." "I'm supposed to be your teacher," Moody said, "and right now all I see is weakness. You have any redeeming qualities, boy?" "What a strange question." "I suppose I'm rather loyal, sir." The professor fed to himself. "Well, I suppose I'll just have to work the jumpiness out of you, teach you to fight people face to face." Moody grinned horribly. Draco twitched and tried to pull away. "Can't use transfiguration. Don't worry, I'm sure I can come up with something else educational." Chapter 47, Traumatizing Children. Harry and Professor Snape ignored each other pretty neatly in their first potions class of the new term, though it seemed unfair to Neville, who didn't deserve that many toads. Watching the Unforgivables in the first defense class gave Harry the cold horrors, but he was neatly distracted by divination, SPEW, and a new letter from Sirius. "Harry, I'm flying north immediately. This news about your scar is the latest in a series of strange rumors that have reached me here. If it hurts again, go straight to Dumbledore. They're saying he's got Mad-Eye out of retirement, which means he's reading the signs, even if no one else is. I'll be in touch soon. My best to Ron and Hermione. Keep your eyes open, Harry Sirius. Harry looked up at Ron and Hermione, who stared back at him. He's flying north, Hermione whispered. He's coming back. Dumbledore's reading what signs, said Ron, looking perplexed. Harry, what's up? Well, Harry said, we're going to clear out his house of old dark objects his family left behind, I think, over the halls. But what's this about Dumbledore and signs? Ron asked. Harry shrugged angrily and excused himself to bed, to lie awake, because it was better than whatever dreams he'd have. Early next morning, Harry was up before breakfast and headed directly to the dungeons, map in hand. Professor Snape wasn't in his office or classroom yet, but if Harry peered carefully, he found Snape's little dart a little bit aways from the mass of hard-to-read Slytherin darts. One day he'd cast an engorgement charm on the map and actually be able to read the thing. Snape's expression when he opened the doors to his rooms and found Harry standing there, hands in his pockets, would later be priceless. Right now, it was just one more thing to get out of the way. Snape swept past him without a word, and Harry followed. They ended up in Snape's office, which was fine. The cup of tea was a surprise, but not entirely unwelcome. Harry slouched into a chair, and Snape sat and sipped his own tea. Someone had better be dead, Snape said. Moody demonstrated the killing curse in class yesterday, Harry said, eyes on his teacup. And an old muggle man this summer, but that was ages ago. I know my Aunt Petunia is full of, she tells lies a lot, but I reckon you were sad about Mum, because it does explain some things. Harry ignored the frigid silence. This was a really nice teacup, blue and white and sort of cute. It must have been a present. Harry couldn't see Professor Snape buying nice blue and white china. We're not going to talk about my mum, Harry continued. But I want someone to know I've only got one memory of her, and that's the one with the killing curse in it. I remember her voice. Harry took a meditative sip of tea. So I know she loved me a lot. Harry ran out of words at this point and was startled out of his silence by the sound of paper. He looked up to see a stack of photographs on the table. He put his teacup down and flipped through them slowly. A Muggle-style photograph of a little red-headed girl, laughing in the summer sun with pondweed in her hair. A teenage red-headed girl, still mostly a child, sitting in the snow outside Hogwarts surrounded by books. Others, all of his mother, all happy, though a few seemed exasperated with the picture-taker. Not many, but different ones from the ones he'd had. She was younger in these. They are copies, Snape said. Want to talk about Voldemort murdering strangers? Harry said brightly, putting the photos down and picking his teacup back up. Snape hummed agreeably. For both their sakes, Harry didn't look at him. I'm having visions with him in them. He's plotting to murder me again. And murdering random muggles. How is your occlumency progressing, Potter? I'm awful at it. I lose my concentration, or I get angry, or Hermione's best out of the three of us, and we're all pretty terrible. That's just using it on regular old nightmares, not. Snape sighed. It could be useful, Harry opined. Right up until he notices it, at which point it will be him having visions of you, Snape snapped. Consider him knowing your every weakness, your every attachment. Harry thought about Hermione at the Quidditch World Cup, in more danger than either him or Ron, and wasn't sure what to say to that. Have you informed the headmaster? Well, no. Why not? He usually knows this stuff without me telling him, Harry muttered defensively. Anyway, it's just Voldemort trying to kill me again. It's not no. If you had a competent defense teacher, you would be informed that dramatic visions of dark wizards are very seldom a good sign. Harry didn't argue. Very well. You will write down an account for the headmaster. I don't think I remember that well now. He was talking to Wormtail, and there was a giant snake, and then an old muggle interrupted and Voldemort killed him, and they wanted to kill me, but slowly somehow. Next time, you will write down an account for the headmaster, immediately after having the vision. Yes, Professor. Harry finished his last swallow of tea in a gulp and ducked out of the room, pausing only to grab his photographs. He was really very serious about not talking to Professor Snape about his mum. He was feeling quite odd at breakfast, going through his new photos. "What are those?" asked Ron, and Harry stifled the urge to hide them. "New photos. Old friend of my mum's found them." If he didn't put Professor Snape and his mother in the same sentence, they didn't exist in the same world. Right, right. "Can I see?" asked Hermione, and the photos were dutifully shared around. "Oh," Hermione said softly, looking at one of the older Muggle photos. "She was like me." "Yeah," Harry agreed, not sure what that tone of voice was, but certain that if he wasn't careful, a girl thing like crying might happen. "I reckon she was brilliant at classes like you too. I heard that." "They don't talk about her in the history books as often as they talk about your father," Hermione commented. "Potter is a magical family name, you know, like Black." "Oh," Harry said, "I met a portrait this summer you wouldn't have gotten along with her, but she liked reciting her family history a lot." "Why didn't you invite us along to explore the house, Harry?" asked Ron. "I would have helped." "You can come over some other holiday," Harry said, in sudden inspiration. "You're always inviting me to your house. It'd be a change." He'd always been able to ignore magical ward maintenance all the time except the summer. Surely, didn't have to stay at Hogwarts for holidays anymore. "What's it like? Who was the portrait?" Harry had a most enjoyable breakfast, explaining the House of Black to Hermione and Ron, and a confused but interested Dean Thomas, who thought it sounded like a horrible death trap. He wasn't quite able to convey why it was wonderful in one conversation, but Hermione said brightly that she'd get him some books on curse breaking and dark object identification, and surely there was a magical potion he could work on that worked as a magical cleaning product without his wand, so he could use it on breaks if he made it during school. Harry did catch Hermione and Ron giving each other proud looks sometime during his happy, rambling explanations, but he didn't quite see why they were so pleased. So he was happy, so what? It wasn't their job to cheer him up or anything. Harry's first twice a week private potions lesson of the new year was marred by him and Professor Snape not talking to each other. Harry turned up on time, freshly glad about the lessons because they filled some time he'd normally distract himself with Quidditch, and paused and watched his professor set up a line of 10 cauldrons. "I need that dandelion fluff deseeded," Snape said, with a nod towards a mountain of dandelion fluff. "Not one seed, mind." Harry scowled and went to work. "This will be dreamless sleep," Snape said, after he had struck Harry even more speechless by keeping all 10 cauldrons smoothly bubbling their way to completion at the same time, moving between them with the grace of an adder. "Madame Pomfrey keeps it in stock for students with nightmares. I trust her to dispense it sensibly." Well, that was an answer to a question Harry hadn't asked, but he made the mental note anyway. "I was hoping to work on a cleaning solution, something I could use during school breaks." "I'm scrubbing bubbles." There was a pause, and Snape offered in a dry voice, "I imagine you will turn it into a candy and sell it with your Weasley conspirators." "I wasn't going to," Harry said, "and I don't know what you're talking about." Harry eyed his professor very suspiciously at Snape, added the next round of ingredients. "Ya went me too. The idea that idiot children might pay to scrub their own mouths out with soap appeals to me." Harry sighed. "Which book is scrubbing bubbles in?" Snape handed it to him a few seconds later. "Read it, write 10 inches, and expect to create it successfully during our Saturday session." Since Harry wasn't talking to him, Harry didn't argue. Chapter 48, Before the Tournament. "So," Harry said, sitting down next to Fred and George, I think I just got Snape's permission to put my stuff on your order forms, as long as I don't admit it's mine, and he never has to admit it's funny. The excited chorus was wonderful, and candy that made you foam at the mouth with soap was added to the yes, absolutely list. Hermione, Harry said, highly intimidated by her huge pile of books neatly cutting her table off from the rest of the library. Want to go visit the kitchens with me? Yauk knew about this. I make candy there, Harry said, piously avoiding any mention of testing candy on house elves and ignoring Hermione's doubtful look. Look, you can do a survey, Harry suggested. That's scientific, doing a survey. Maybe some house elves really are happy, even if they aren't all happy. That way you'll have data to back you up when everyone's arguing. Harry was somewhat alarmed by the light he sparked in her eyes. Even Hagrid was adding to their workload. The blast-ended Scroots were growing at a remarkable pace, given that nobody had yet discovered what they ate. Hagrid was delighted, and as part of their project, suggested that they come down to his hut on alternate evenings to observe the Scroots and make notes on their extraordinary behavior. I will not, said Draco Malfoy flatly, when Hagrid had proposed this with the air of Father Christmas pulling an extra-large toy out of his sack. I see enough of these foul things during lessons, thanks. Hagrid's smile faded off his face. Ye'll do while you're told, he growled, or I'll be talking a leaf out of Professor Moody's book. I hear ye made a good ferret, Malfoy. The Gryffindors roared with laughter. Malfoy flushed with anger, but apparently the memory of Moody's punishment was still sufficiently painful to stop him from retorting. Harry, who knew Malfoy had been involved in some weird way in rescuing Buckbeak last year, caught him after the lesson, but Malfoy just glared at him. Don't talk to me, Potter. I'm having enough trouble rescuing my dignity without being associated with you. Maybe if you cared a little less about your dignity, you'd be less easy to bait, Harry yelled after him, which appeared to just make Malfoy's shoulders twitch. Malfoy had been going around without his minions constantly right behind him lately, which Harry found very weird, and Harry had heard that the Slytherin version of the defense lesson on the Imperius had been pretty embarrassing for some people, naming no names, who could turn into a cat under the influence and do a little dance. Still, if Malfoy wanted to be left alone, Harry was happy not to deal with him. He had enough problems with his divination homework. Harry was going about his day very peacefully a week or so later when a small white cat popped out of hiding from behind a statue. Harry glared at it. The cat shimmered into Draco Malfoy. He was smiling, which was never a good sign. What do you want, Draco? Harry, is that any way to talk to a classmate? I liked you better when you were making insinuations about my family. I can do that as well if you like. How are your muggles? Forget I said anything. What do you want, Draco? Well, you've had defense. I want to practice the Imperius curse. Harry stared at him. And you seem like someone who could use practice throwing off the Imperius curse, Draco continued. Just in case. It's unforgivable, Harry said, rather blankly. You'll be sent to Azkaban. Draco drew his wand, glanced down at it with a small smile, and then drew a second wand from somewhere. Whoever owns this would be sent to Azkaban. I have never seen this wand before in my life. You stole it, didn't you? Don't ask stupid questions, Harry. It's dark magic. It does something to your mind. You are charmingly naive if you think it's the first dark spell I've tried. That doesn't make it a good idea. Do you want to practice throwing off the Imperius or not? It's all one to me. We don't have a place to practice, Harry tried. You want Peeves catching you trying out unforgivables. I've seen that map of yours. You know every forgotten place in this school. Well, there was the Chamber of Secrets, admittedly, but Harry didn't exactly feel like revisiting that particular set of bad memories. Almost dying had a way of making you remember a place unfondly. You could try it on me, Draco suggested. That would be fair, wouldn't it? He could get Draco to apologize to Hermione on bended knee. and tell Ron he thought Ron's dad was a great role model. Harry shook himself. What had he just been contemplating? No, no, this is a stupid idea. There has to be ways to prepare your mind for the imperious that have nothing to do with doing dark magic and getting expelled. Like what? Draco challenged. I don't know. A clumency would probably help. Harry, you are ignorant about every facet of wizarding life, and you know what a clumency is. Harry gave him a flat, even look. Thanks for the idea, Harry, Draco said with a sweet smile. You're a wonderful classmate. Yes, Draco asked archly. If you keep being semi-decent in private and a prat in public, I'm going to start punching you in the face a lot. I don't care how many points they take off for fighting. Not worried I'll hex you. You've only ever hexed me when my back is turned, Harry said dryly. I'm probably safe. Draco glared. Say, is it true we're sort of cousins? Harry asked, since he had Draco here and he'd been thinking about it. Draco looked blank. I was talking to a Black family portrait, Harry elaborated. She said the Blacks had married into the Potters and the Malfoys pretty recently. Most of the old families are related, Draco said, giving Harry a narrow-eyed look. It explains why you remind me so much of my cousin Dudley, Harry added cheerfully. Draco gave him a very evil glare and wandered off muttering something about Winklingon power of friendship and what was very possibly going to destroy them all with the power of my mind. Harry was not certain which professor you warned about a classmate wanting to grow up to be a supervillain from a cheesy cartoon show. But he had a feeling he should probably do something about Draco being poised to break out into a full-blown supervillain rant. Sadly, trying to explain his concerns to Ron just led to Ron pointing out, well, he's always been an evil little git. What's changed? Harry had to admit that not very much had changed. There was a line in Sirius, next letter that made Harry feel light as air and twice as bright. Should be able to arrange something for number 12 for next school break if you really want to visit there. I did mention the madhouse elf and other assorted evil, didn't I? Will send further word as soon as I've arranged security.